Hello, I hope you are doing well. My name is Jacqueline Vino from Galasso Learning Solutions, and welcome to this NANO recording. Today, we are going to cover a very important topic, which is the cornerstone of the accounting profession. Of course, we have ethics. More specifically, the AICPA's Professional Ethics Executive Committee, or PEEC for short, has issued a new ethics interpretation in the very interesting area of simultaneous employment. So what we are going to do during this NANO course is discuss some of the background information, why this new ethics interpretation was issued, and also what some of those key updates are. We have a lot of information to get through during this NANO, so with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. So this final interpretation is definitely something that has been a long time coming. We've been talking about it for a number of years now. Just to give you a little bit of a background, the exposure draft for this came out in December of 2024, and comments were due by March of 2025. So definitely a decent comment period in terms of length. And to give you a little bit of history about the old ethics interpretation and the extant guidance, it explicitly prohibits all partners and professional employees of a firm from being employed or associated with an Attest client. However, there were two specific exceptions. The first one had to deal with adjunct faculty members of educational institutions. So think about those, adjunct accounting professors. And a second exception was for members of government audit organizations. However, though, back in 2021, in PEEC's 2021 to 2023 strategy and work plan, they were actually looking for some input as to whether additional exceptions should be made to this interpretation outside of the adjunct faculty members and members of the government audit organization. For example, the committee was considering whether a partner or an employee at the firm could be simultaneously employed by the United States Armed Forces, a branch of the military, while that same firm is performing an audit on the branch of the military. And that was something that was popular. It resulted in the USERRA temporary enforcement for members of the armed forces, and PEEC received recommendations for switching to a more principles-based approach while also providing more examples and guidance. And PEEC did a lot of work on this. They distributed a survey to more than 500 stakeholders. They ended up receiving 77 total responses. And of those 77 people that did respond, there was an overwhelming majority that supported, revising this interpretation and doing some changes, which is what we are about to discuss right now. So what are some of the key updates from this new interpretation? First and foremost, we have a new definition. Very exciting. However, though, what did the old definition say so we can sort of appreciate some of these changes? So in the extant guidance, the definition of simultaneous employment or association with the Attest client is very specific. It includes lots of different roles, such as directors, officers, employees, promoters, underwriters, all that good stuff. What PEEC decided to do was remove that language. And now we have a revised definition. So this new definition would be whether we have a partner or a professional employee of the member's firm serves as a member of those charged with governance. So somebody who is able to oversee the strategic direction of the organization. So if you were able to direct the organization, and also whether you are employed by the organization or not. And they also decided to include voluntary positions as well. So also kind of interesting there. So this definition is moving away from specific titles like director, officer, and instead we're thinking about whether or not this person has a key position, whether they are actually charged with governance. And, they also wanted to add within the guidance that if you do hold a key position at the Attest client, that is actually going to create a management participation threat. Now, aside from the revised definition of simultaneous employment, what is another change that is in this revised ethics interpretation? We have two things, really. We have a rules-based approach, and then we also have a principles-based approach in here. So first and foremost, what is the rule? So the rule in this interpretation is that it prohibits covered members from any simultaneous employment or association with an Attest client. Very much rules-based. And in addition, it also says that no partner or professional employee in the firm is able to hold a key position at the Attest client. So those are the rules. But what should we do if we find ourselves sort of in a different situation here of being simultaneously employed? So under the revised interpretation, we can also apply a more principles-based approach. If we potentially intend to accept an offer of being simultaneously employed, we need to do a couple of things. First and foremost, we have to report this offer to the right person at our firm. We have to tell people about this. And secondly, we need to, of course, apply the conceptual framework to evaluate whether we do potentially have the familiarity threat, the management participation threat, advocacy threat, self-interest threat, self-review threat, all of that good stuff. We have to apply the conceptual framework to determine whether these threats are at an acceptable level or not. And if they're not, we're going to have to, of course, apply some safeguards. So we're starting to see here how this is also a bit more principles-based and how that is coming into play within this interpretation. So when we are trying to apply the conceptual framework for independence, what are some of the factors that we should be considering when we are applying this conceptual framework? Lots of different things are included that we need to consider, such as our position and role at the firm. Are we a partner? Maybe we are a staff person. What is our role at the Attest Client? What is the level of assurance of this Attest engagement? Are we charged with governance? Are we just employed? What is the nature and scope of the work that we perform at the Attest Client? What is the size and structure of the Attest Client? Many, many different things are included in this interpretation to kind of help us determine, when we're applying this conceptual framework, what are some of these factors that come into play. Now, additionally, what if we conclude that after considering all of the different factors, maybe we are not at an acceptable level when it comes to the threats? We're going to need to then go ahead and apply safeguards to either eliminate the threat, number one, or two, reduce this threat to a more acceptable level. So what would be some examples of things that might be considered a safeguard in this scenario? Probably designating an appropriate reviewer who has not provided any services to the Attest Client to go in and independently review the Attest work that was performed. Or maybe we could potentially modify that individual's position or role at the Attest Client so that the threats to independence are reduced to a more acceptable level. So maybe we can kind of refine the scope of what they do at the Attest Client. Maybe they're no longer going to be in a key position, for example. Now, another very important thing is that communication with those charged with governance is going to no longer be sufficient by itself as a safeguard. It can only be part of a much broader safeguard strategy. And another thing that I want to also mention here is maybe we need to apply more than one safeguard. And if threats cannot be eliminated or reduced to that more acceptable level after applying some of these safeguards, then our independence is going to be impaired. Now, another section of this interpretation that's kind of interesting is it addresses situations where the employee of the Attest Client is also potentially engaged as, an independent contractor by the firm to perform some professional services for the Attest Client. So in this case, independence is going to be impaired if that independent contractor / individual is on the engagement team of the Attest Client, is in a position to influence the engagement with the Attest Client, maybe they are in a key position at the Attest Client, and also serving in a role where they are potentially charged with governance. So we have this new section here with independent contractors. However, though, there are now 3 exceptions to this rule that are laid out in this revised interpretation. Now, of course, at the beginning of this NANO, we talked about 2 exceptions. This first exception is still the same. So we have the adjunct faculty members at colleges and universities. So you can be a partner at the firm, and that firm can provide attest work to the educational institution so long as all of the safeguards are met, meaning that the partner is not in a key position at the college or university. They are just an adjunct faculty member teaching a class or 2. They are not working on that particular attest engagement, and they cannot influence the attest engagement. We also still have the same exception for government audit organizations. So the member can perform an attest engagement for a governmental entity so long as the head of the government audit organization has sufficient oversight and also meets at least some of the criteria, right? At least one of these. They have to be, elected by voters, appointed by a legislative body with the power to remove them, and also appointed by somebody else as long as that legislative body confirms the appointment and has oversight over the removal. And we also have a third new exception that was added in, right? So we've always had the adjunct faculty member. We've also had the government audit organizations, but now we have this new one. So basically, if a partner or employee works for the Attest client, independence is not impaired when compliance with employment laws. So this is when we have persons of the military under USERRA conflicts with this interpretation, so long as we have the appropriate safeguards, which would be that that person does not hold a key position or governance role at the client. So they're not in charge of the military, they are not part of that specific Attest engagement team, and they also cannot influence the Attest engagement. So now we have this new exception here when we're talking about specific employment laws. So just to quickly summarize some of these key points here, because this was a lot of information, we have the covered member cannot serve in a governance role or as an employee. That's one of the rules. 2, the partner or professional employee cannot hold a key position. However, though, we have to, of course, apply the conceptual framework with any other sort of association or employment relationships. And we have 3 exceptions. We have adjunct faculty, government audit organization, and legal conflicts with employment laws. And then we also have some new information on independent contractors. Also, very importantly here, when is the effective date for this interpretation? September 15th of 2026. And that is all we have for today. Hopefully this ethics interpretation will make things a bit more clear when it comes to the topic of simultaneous employment. Once again, my name is Jacqueline Vino from Golosso Learning Solutions. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I hope to see you again on a future NANO recording.